don't give a fuck. You're tripping with JJ.
Wow!
Fuck you, asshole.
Tell your bitch I said hi, nigga.
Any crimes in this room. Oh, I almost look at that as more unique and incredible than going to the Olympics. It's weird because, like, I mean, they're kind of in the same, like, category, I guess, because they're both difficult and nearly impossible to do, I guess.
Right.
But, you know, when you look at whether it's a politician or not, and whether you respect every decision they make or not, when you look up to somebody, to get to meet them and shake their hand is incredible, you know?
Right,
And
right.
so that goes for anybody that looks up to anybody. I mean, you can look up to anybody. It doesn't matter what other people think. Like, that's your moment to, like, shake hands with someone you look up to. And so I was really grateful to have that opportunity. It wasn't even supposed to happen, and it did. And so, yeah, it was.
That's pretty cool.
It was
That's
awesome.
a pretty good highlight
Yeah.
for your career.
Yeah.
How did you support yourself when you was going through the whole wrestling thing?
Most of my career, I worked like a traditional job. I worked, and actually, this is something I bring up more now. During my career, I think I was embarrassed or more ashamed, I guess.
You was doing a sandwich thing?
I had a lot of different jobs. Like, literally,
Okay.
I had a lot of jobs. Do you remember a couple years ago when that former TV star was, like, bagging groceries and someone took a picture of him? Do you remember that? It was on social media, and he was, like, shamed. And then he got, like, a lot of public support. I don't remember his name, but I remember when that happened. It hit me so personally because I think that was like 2015 or 14.
I don't recall.
It was a while ago.
Yeah, I don't recall.
And when it happened, I was working at Starbucks. I will never forget it because the house I was renting from this wrestling family, they were giving me like a crazy good discount because I couldn't afford anything because you don't make any money as an Olympic athlete.
Right.
And I was working at Starbucks. I was working full time. So I would work like 4:30 a.m. till whenever my shift ended. And then I would go straight to practice. And then I would take a break and I'd go to practice again. And there were times where I had two jobs. And this was like 90% of my career. I did not stop working a traditional job until like 2018, I'll say. I retired in 2021. During the pandemic, I retired. So that, just to give you an idea, like almost my entire career, I was just working to earn money.
But you working to earn money, and then at the same time, you got to stay focused and healthy for the Olympics.
Right.
How did you create that balance and not exhaust yourself in the process?
Well, I think, you know, depending on who you're talking to, this is definitely, I don't know how else to say it because it's not the position I'm in now. So I wouldn't even be able to speak on it if I hadn't experienced it. But when you don't have options, your options are very simple. When you don't have parents that are paying for college, when you don't have, like, most of my life, I didn't have health insurance. Most of my life.
Wow.
Most of my life, I just didn't have a backup plan or anything, a security, anything. I didn't have anything to fall back on. So if, you know, before I graduated high school, I was living on my own. There were many couches. And I was talking to someone recently. Like, I've never actually been homeless, but I've come pretty close. And I have family members that have been homeless. So it's not a subject that I bring up lightly. But I've never lived on the street. I mean, but I will say this. I've like checked into like cheap motels. Like it got to that point. It wasn't like I'm sleeping in my car, but I mean, it got pretty close. And when you're in that point and you don't have the option of like family money or whatever,
Can't tap into nothing.
there's nothing to tap into. There's no one to call. There's nobody. You just You get a job and you work and you figure it out. And that's it. And it's very simple. And so for my career, it was like, I started wrestling in an era where it wasn't really about your shoe sponsor or your like endorsement. And the people that got endorsements were already Olympic champions. Like, just being a great athlete or being on a national team didn't get you an endorsement. Like, now I have a great pitch that can get me sponsors. I don't even have to do any. I've gotten sponsors now just because the world has changed and I know how to pitch myself. But back then, I remember someone telling me, yeah, we can talk about maybe writing a memoir once you've won a medal. I'm like, do you understand what it takes just to make an Olympic team? But you're like telling me I can't write a transcript without a medal, and I'm literally writing a book right now. So like
insult.
The world has changed, and it is kind of insulting. But back then, it wasn't insulting. That was just reality. Being a woman, being mixed race, I was the only female at ASU. I mean, it wasn't like there wasn't momentum. You were like breaking down a wall every time you did something. So there was no, oh, like we knew you were coming, so we have this for you. Like,
right.
So it was I was just fighting such a different battle than what. And so you know, I say I did work most of my career because I had to. And then near the end, the industry and being an athlete changed and the world changed, and it got so competitive that I was like, I just need sponsors. So I got tons of sponsors. I really perfected my craft and my pitch, and I found a way to get sponsors so that I didn't have to work because, you know, the people I was competing against, they weren't working. I knew they weren't working. I was always the underdog, and I knew they were getting that #1 pay, right? So I was like, I have to find a way to just be able to train. So around 2018, I believe that was when I finally put in my 2-week notice at Starbucks. But I'd worked many jobs leading up to that, you know? And so to answer your question, like, I had sponsors through the years, but the majority of my income came from just working. I mean, even after I made the London team and I was #1 in the U.S., I interned at eBay for 9.
That's pretty cool.
It was awesome for 9 or 10 months, and it was awesome in hindsight. Actually, it was very difficult going through it. And I made more in 2 weeks because I was an MBA student. I made more in 2 weeks as an intern than I did in a month as the #1 athlete in the U.S. So, and that was something I was really vocal about because people still, like, to this day, people still think I was paid by the government. And I'm like, no. Like,
because you was an Olympian.
Yeah, like, people just are very misguided about what it's like. And that's why when I worked at Starbucks, and that's why I brought up that TV actor, because when I worked at Starbucks, this high school kid that came in that I trained with a lot back then, it was his family that I rented my house from. I remember him posting a picture on Instagram. He's in college now, and he's like a stellar athlete.
Wow.
So that's why I'm like not naming his name. But he was like, in his post, I mean, I remember it all so clearly. It said, saw one of my favorite wrestlers today at Starbucks. And I'm like in my getup, right? And it was a very hard lifestyle, but it's not like I was ashamed of it. I had always worked my whole life. I had never known a 2-income family. Wow. Like, I never knew that.
Wow.
So, like, I always knew what it was like to just have to work. And my life had always been a grind. How did you do it? Well, I didn't know anything different. But he posted it on Instagram, and I remember he tagged me, and somebody commented, I don't know who they were, and they were like, if she's so awesome, why is she working at Starbucks? And this was like after I went to the Olympics.
Wow.
I already made the London team, but like people, and this is just how humans are, especially Americans. Like, we just assume, well, if you're doing this, like, you should be this. You
Right.
should have this. I'm like,
Right.
no, I'm pretty sure you make more than I do, and I'm the #1 athlete in the country, in the world. And you're super inspired every 4 years, but that's not paying my bills, you know?
Still got to go out there and make it happen.
Yeah, so, like, that was the first time I had ever been, someone had, like, attempted to shame me. And I did go through a period of, like, shame. You know, I remember I was dating a guy at the time, and I was, like, embarrassed by it. And it, like, actually impacted our relationship a lot, because I was, like, I remember at the time I was, like, selling plasma to help, like, fill my gas tank. And I was so ashamed to talk about this stuff. I was so embarrassed, because I was like, I'm doing an honest day's work and I'm being shamed. How can I talk about these things? Some high school kid did that to me. And, like, I'm a human, you know, and I had already gone through a lot of, like, adversity in
Right.
my life, like,
Right.
real adversity.
Right.
And so, that strained our relationship a lot, because I wasn't honest about what I was going through. I remember getting a grant from the Women's Sports Foundation, and in my, when I was writing my essay to, like, get this grant, and at that time I was literally living paycheck to paycheck, plus, like, donating plasma, and other things. I was, like, selling, like, pictures and, like, shoes on eBay. Like, I was, like, scraping to, like, pay my bills.
Get
I mean,
by.
it was like, and it was just a hard time, you know. And I remember the Women's Sports Foundation, they wanted me to speak. They were so moved by my story, because I had been very honest. But I was like, I don't know if I want to talk about. It was, like, super hard for me to talk about that stuff in front of those people. Like,
You wasn't proud of it.
I wasn't. Shame is, like, a really crazy thing. It's one thing to say, I'm not proud of this, or I'm not proud of you, but to be like, I'm ashamed, like, I think that's, when we're talking about all the things going on in the world right now, the relevant issues in the world, shame is probably, I would argue, I don't have proof of this, this is my opinion, I would argue that shame is the #1 reason why people don't talk more about real things that they struggle with.
Wow.
Shame is why people don't talk about why they're suicidal. Shame is why people don't talk about mental health. Shame is why people don't talk about how they need help from the government, or why they can't take care of their kids, or why they have addictions, or why they're homeless, or it's shame. It's
But you've been down that road. So
yeah.
what would you say to people who's going through that right now?
Well, we're in an era now where there's platforms to speak. We have not arrived by any means, but I think it's not so much telling people you just need to speak up, because I learned at a young age to not speak up. You just learn when
Right.
you want to talk and when you don't. You don't have to live a lot of life to know when you're comfortable talking about stuff.
Right.
But I think openness breeds openness. And even in my relationship now, my partner, like, he understands mental health a little bit, but really I push myself to be vulnerable with him, because not so much that he'll, like, empathize with me, but so that when he comes across somebody else, or he sees something in the media, he understands, like, no, I know what this looks like in real time. So there's things that I share with him and I talk to him about that are hard, that I'm like, I'm not telling you this so you'll feel bad for me. I'm telling you so that when you see something online, or you see somebody talk about something after 30 years, you don't judge her. You realize, yeah, 30 years didn't feel like 30 years to them. 30 years felt like a day, and it's still hard for them to talk about. And to just be slow to speak, right? And quick to listen. And so I think that it's a lot of layers, and it's a mixed bag. I don't know that. I work with a lot of youth too, and I volunteer a lot, and I will say that and I studied criminal justice. I switched degrees in college, but and I'm still like embarrassingly obsessed with the study of criminology, and I just watch way too much crime TV. But I do think that what I found in my experience is that you will never, ever convince anyone to talk. All you can do is wait and be patient and inspire them with your openness. And then when people are open, just shut your mouth and listen. And, you know, I've even seen people write things and say things like, I understand what they're going through, but I don't agree. And I'm like, you know, if you really understood, you wouldn't even say that, because understanding means it doesn't matter if you agree. Because that's what empathy is. Empathy is like, it doesn't matter if you agree. Empathy is you just shut your mouth and let them talk and go through the process. And you are just there setting an example as somebody who is listening.
Right.
You know,
Right.
when
Showing that support.
yeah, you know, like I had retired when Simone Biles came forward with her, you know, mental health struggles. And there's been a lot of other athletes. And I remember in 2012 taking a picture with all the female gymnasts. And I'm not proud of this, but I remember telling like 2 or 3 people, I was like, yeah, they weren't very friendly. They're like America's sweethearts. And then later we find out about Nassar. That was like a learning curve for me. You know, it's quick to forget. It's really easy to forget.
Right.
You know, and then looking back, I mean, I have these pictures and I'm like, of course they weren't friendly. They had a predator that was being enabled by their NGB. I mean, like, so, I mean, there, like I
You
said,
destroy a lot of lives.
there's so many lives, but you realize, you know, and then people are so, you know, you have people saying like, man, Simone is so, like, you have people saying things that you're like, you have no clue what you're talking about.
Nah, Simone is a fucking hero in my book.
She is, but I've literally seen athletes of color, athletes that have struggled with mental health publicly, athletes that have struggled with adversity publicly, athletes that I've seen go from like nobodies with 20 followers to like their MMA fighters say, I don't agree with what she did. And I'm like, you really forgot. You
Right.
really forgot.
Right.
You just need to like shut your mouth and
Yeah.
listen, you know? So,
She's a hero
she is.
in my book. I watched her way back. I think it was in 2004 or something like that. But she's a hero. So how did you help yourself?
You're the best.
How did you deal with sexism and racism? How did that play a role?
You know, it's really interesting. I wasn't even super aware of, I had like less than a handful of what I acknowledge as racist experiences growing up. My experiences with race were they were different because I'm light-skinned, but, you know, I have features and my hair, and there's like certain things about me that are very obviously, like, we'll say ethnic, whatever. Like that's what they're putting on the shampoo bottles now. Ethnic hair. Like, yay, we've come so far. But I remember growing up not seeing anyone that looked like me. I mean, there were either black people or white people.
Right.
And I've spoken on this a lot too, and I actually just read her memoir recently. Mariah Carey was like my idol because I always had a sense, it was different. I say this a lot, but it was different back then. Like, I couldn't just Google and see like, oh, is she mixed? I just always had a sense that like she was somebody I could relate to. But there wasn't anybody on TV that looked like me. I mean, I had to have a really strong imagination. But as far as being a female, that was something I ran into a lot just being a wrestler.
Right.
In high school, in college, in the opportunities following college, in getting paid by my sponsors. I mean, I had hard talks and hard meetings, and I went like head to head with people. And you do that enough and you finally realize your worth. And now I say it, you know, candidly, but this was like years in the making. And now, you know, when athletes ask for my advice, I'm like, I give them input. Like, you have to advocate for yourself. You have to. But as far as race, I think it was something that I saw more in hindsight. And the race issues that I experienced were more, it wasn't so much that people were racist to me. Most of my friends growing up were white people. I grew up in Milwaukee, Oregon. And Oregon is awesome. It's a very culturally liberal. I mean, they literally hug trees. I mean, we were recycling there, and when I moved to Arizona, you had to pay to recycle. I mean, we were just like ahead of the game. We were just like, I was so proud. I'm still proud to have grown up in Oregon. I love Oregon. But as far as race, most of my insecurities about race came from the fact that, like, I didn't have hair like my friends, and my mom's white, and I was raised by my mom, and I wasn't taught how to deal with that. I mean, you know, she was dealing with her own stuff, and she was not even present to help me deal with that. And so there were just like a lot of things I just figured out on my own.
Did your friends treat you different?
You know, I'm gonna assume maybe on some level they did. There were I felt like growing up, I always felt different, and some of that was mental health stuff that I didn't realize till later, and some of it was, I think there's just a lot that happens in hindsight. There's a lot of revelations that happen in hindsight. And because of the eras that I mean, I'm a millennial. Like, I was born in the 80s. I grew up in the 90s, and now it's 2020, you know, and it's like, I mean, you see social media come to life, which has impacted everybody's perception of reality. It just has. And I think growing up, you know, I just worked so hard. I wanted bone straight hair and a tan and straight teeth, and I wanted a smaller nose, and I wanted better eyebrows, and I wanted all the things that didn't come with being half Jamaican, like, basically.
Hey, we love Jamaicans.
Oh, yeah, we do. We do.
You guys are the best. You understand what I'm saying? I love Jamaicans. Now, a lot of these insecurities, were you ever a victim of abuse in any form or fashion?
So growing up, one thing that I think had a profound impact on me growing up was just, I don't even know how to categorize it, but I'll just say that I didn't really have any type of parental, like, I was raised by my mom, and she was not present. My grandparents were very involved. It was one of those things.
Where were your dad? What was your dad?
He was in Alaska. I was born in Alaska. And my dad, you know, my dad and I are very similar, and actually we're really close now. We're so, I mean, that's just DNA, though, because I didn't grow up with him, but we've talked about this. Like, my dad came here as a legal immigrant. Like, he, you know, and coming from Jamaica, if you talk to any Jamaicans, like, you know, in spite of what people think, a lot of people that come here from other countries will work any job, and they will keep their head down, and they will never talk back. My dad, and this was also something I was ashamed of for many years, but my dad was a janitor for the Anchorage School District for many decades,
Wow.
like decades.
Wow.
And now he has a great pension, and he's like, and we've talked about this, because he's like, he was just trying to survive. Like, when my parents divorced, it was ugly. It was like the worst of the worst. And so, like, he was like, he said, like, I wasn't picky, and I wasn't thinking about retirement or benefits. Like, now he's living a life that, as a Jamaican-born man that like literally grew up in a hut, like a dirt floor hut. You don't think about medical. Like, I take him to the dentist, and he has coverage. Like, it's crazy, you know. He visits me.
You're not used to that, right? He wasn't used to that.
Yeah. So, like, anyways, that's a little off topic, but so I didn't grow up with him, but I grew up with my mom, and she had a lot of mental health issues, and I was very bitter towards her because I was acutely aware that I remember growing up thinking, like, it's like I can't go anywhere with her. I can't bring people here. I don't know how to act around people. I don't even know what normal is.
Were you embarrassed of your mom?
Super embarrassed. But that was my normal. You know, like, you know, I would, like, sitting down for a family dinner was literally, when I was younger, like in high school, that's literally something I only saw on TV. Like, only.
You never had family
My
dinner?
entire family was, like, so dysfunctional on that side. So dysfunctional. I mean, there's so many stories. And if I'm not saying more, it's more out of respect for these people. But it was so dysfunctional. And I remember being at school. I was close to all the school counselors. It's funny back then because I look back and I'm like, well, I'm not actually embarrassed about it anymore. But I look back and I'm like, dang, like I actually was very close to all my school counselors. We're all friends on Facebook, like all of them, not just one of them, like literally like all 7 of them were like, I spent time in their offices, like time, you know? Yeah,
real time. Did you have a stepfather?
No, I mean, my mom had people over. But there was a lot of mental health issues, and there are things I'm sure she grew up with that she never spoke of. And I had a lot of resentment. And
where did the resentment and the anger and not just angry, not just frustration, not just feeling like my mom is my mom, she's going through a lot of mental stuff, but it had to affect you to the point where you became dysfunctional.
Yeah. That's so funny you say that. And there's like a couple of things I want to address with that. You know, I was watching a show recently and there was a quote in it that said, back then, people were working so much they didn't have time for mental health. No one was depressed because they were working. And I was like, I can see how that would be appealing to today's viewers, but that's not true. I always struggled with mental health, but I was working so much that I couldn't deal with it because it never went away, right? And I look at my mom, and, you know, I think mental health is a little bit, I don't think it's man-made, but I do think that we just, as a country, we don't address it effectively, and that's why nothing changes, and that's why people just go to jail or they're just medicated, and we just don't address this stuff accurately, in my opinion. But I didn't. It's weird because there are other family members. I'm gonna leave that vague, but I have family members. I've spoken about this with my dad and my mom frequently. I have family members that I would not be surprised if they were like sociopaths and they were like, I would not be surprised. I know enough about criminology to not be surprised by that.
So you did see some signs.
Oh yeah, I saw a lot of stuff. I saw a lot growing up. But because mental health was not a phrase, I never spoke openly about my own struggles until 2016. And I remember it very clearly. The first time I was ever able to speak up about it around other athletes and not be judged or criticized, I remember, because before that I had been told not to do that in front of other people. I'd literally been instructed, do not show this in front of other athletes. So, you know...
You never asked why? I mean, we know why, but did you ever ask why?
I mean, think about it. If you're growing up in the 1800s and someone says, well, this is the only way to... Like, women can't vote. As a woman, you don't ask why. That's just how it is. Until an outlier comes, right? So that seems obvious. Why didn't you ask why? Well, how would I have known? I was a child. Like, you know what I mean? And I was so young. Like, I'm not saying it's a good excuse. I'm just saying that was the reality. But I will say, growing up, I knew, and I don't know why, and this is why I always say this is why I believe in God, because there was a couple of things that happened to me when I was young that that made me believe in God. Number one, because I wrote music and I was a singer, and I would just get inspired with songs. And I remember I was like 6 years old, and I remember thinking, you don't just get songs like this unless God is real. Like, and I remember having a moment, you know. But the second thing is, I knew, and the dice fall. It falls like some people grow up the way I grew up and they become bad people. But I was like, I don't want to be anything like what I saw. I don't want to be anything like that. And I knew I